When Lila Bennett crashed through the glass door of New York's most dangerous crime lord on her first day of work, everyone in the room stopped breathing. Dante Morelli didn't tolerate mistakes. His last assistant had vanished after filing one report late. But instead of the expected execution, something impossible happened. Dante laughed. What started as a disaster of spilled coffee and broken antiques became the most dangerous partnership in the city's underworld. This is their story. A collision of chaos and control that would either save them both or destroy everything. Follow this story to the end, hit like, and comment with your city so I can see how far our story travels. The elevator to the 47th floor of the Morelli Tower moved with the kind of silence that made Lila's stomach turn. She clutched her worn leather portfolio against her chest, trying to ignore the way her reflection in the polished steel doors looked like someone pretending to be competent. Her blonde hair, which she'd attempted to tame into something resembling professionalism, had already started escaping its pins. The navy dress she'd bought specifically for this interview had a coffee stain near the hem that she'd tried to hide by adjusting the belt. It didn't help. "You're fine," she whispered to herself, watching her lips move in the distorted reflection. "It's just an office job. Administrative assistant. Filing, phones, maybe some light accounting. You've done harder things." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Lila stepped into a reception area that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought humanity was a design flaw. Everything was black, white, or chrome. The floors were polished marble that reflected the recessed lighting like still water. The furniture looked expensive and deeply uncomfortable. Behind a curved desk that resembled a spaceship control panel, a woman with severe features and hair pulled back so tight it must have given her a headache looked up from her computer screen. "You're late," the woman said. No greeting, no smile. Lila glanced at her watch. "I'm actually 7 minutes early." "Mr. Morelli expects people 15 minutes before their scheduled appointment. You're late." The woman's eyes were the color of old pennies, flat and unimpressed. "Name?" "Lila Bennett. I have an interview at 9. I know why you're here." The woman stood, somehow making the simple action look threatening. She was tall, angular, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than Lila's monthly rent. "Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless Mr. Morelli addresses you directly. Don't make eye contact unless he initiates it. And for your own sake, don't waste his time." Lila blinked. "Is he interviewing me or interrogating me?" The woman's expression didn't change. With Mr. Morelli, there's rarely a difference. They walked down a hallway lined with abstract art that Lila suspected was either worth millions or a very expensive joke. The carpet here was so thick, her heels sank into it with each step. Every door they passed was closed, but she could feel the weight of people working behind them, the kind of concentrated silence that came from fear of making noise. "I'm sorry," Lila said, because silence made her nervous and nervous made her talk. "I didn't catch your name. I didn't throw it." The woman stopped in front of a set of double doors made of dark wood with chrome handles. "This is Mr. Morelli's office. He's on a call. When the light above the door turns green, you may enter, not before." "What if it doesn't turn green?" "Then you'll wait." "For how long?" The woman looked at her like she'd asked why the sky was blue. "Until it turns green, or until Mr. Morelli's schedule changes and your appointment is canceled, whichever comes first." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Lila stood alone in the hallway, staring at the light above the door. It was red, aggressively red. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, then checked her watch. 9 on the dot. She was technically on time by normal human standards, just not by the standards of whatever dystopian efficiency cult ran this place. Minutes passed. The light stayed red. She could hear a voice through the door, deep, measured, with the kind of control that suggested the speaker never raised it because he'd never needed to. She couldn't make out words, just tone. It wasn't angry. It wasn't kind either. It was the sound of someone stating facts that would not be argued with. Lila's feet hurt. The heels she'd worn were half a size too small, borrowed from her roommate because her own professional shoes had died a tragic death, involving a broken subway grate and a rainstorm. She tried shifting her weight again. Her portfolio was getting heavy. She set it down carefully against the wall, then immediately picked it back up because leaving it on the floor felt wrong in a building this aggressively pristine. The light turned green. Lila grabbed the handle and pushed. The door didn't move. She pushed harder. Nothing. Pull, not push. Obviously. She grabbed the handle again, pulled, and the door swung open with enough momentum that she stumbled forward into the office. Her heel caught the edge of the carpet, and she went sprawling into the room like someone had shoved her from behind. Her portfolio hit the floor first. Papers exploded out of it. Her resume, her references, her hastily printed examples of spreadsheet work, scattering across the dark hardwood floor like oversized confetti. Then Lila herself hit something that crashed spectacularly. She registered several things at once: the sound of shattering porcelain, the smell of old paper and expensive cologne, and the absolute silence that followed the destruction. She was on her hands and knees on the floor of Dante Morelli's office, surrounded by pieces of what had been a vase. Not just any vase. This had been the kind of vase that belonged in a museum, blue and white, with delicate painted scenes that were now just expensive fragments. "Oh no," Lila breathed. "Oh no, no, no." "Stand up." The voice came from behind a desk the size of a small car. It was the same voice she'd heard through the door, but clearer now. Calm. Too calm. Lila scrambled to her feet, which was harder than it should have been because her heel was still caught in the carpet and her hands were shaking. She managed to get vertical, then immediately stepped on one of her scattered resume pages, which slid under her foot like ice. She grabbed the edge of a bookshelf to keep from falling again. Something else fell off the shelf. A small sculpture. It hit the floor with a crack. "Stop moving," the voice said. Lila froze. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She'd been in the room for maybe 15 seconds, and she'd already destroyed what was probably thousands of dollars worth of art. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'll pay for it. I don't know how I'll pay for it, but I'll figure something out. I'll get a second job. Look at me." Lila forced herself to look up from the wreckage. Dante Morelli sat behind his desk with the stillness of a predator deciding whether something was prey or just entertainment. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s maybe, with dark hair cut sharp enough to draw blood, and a face that looked like it had been assembled by someone who understood geometry better than warmth. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been born there. No tie. The top button of his white shirt was undone, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd been buttoned up completely. His eyes were dark. Not brown. Genuinely dark, the kind that didn't reflect light so much as absorb it. He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was solving in real time. "You're Lila Bennett," he said. Not a question. "Yes." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. I had an interview. I'm so sorry about the vase. It was 14th century Ming dynasty, worth approximately $80,000. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. I can set up a payment plan." It was also a fake. He tilted his head slightly. "I keep the real one in storage. This office gets too much foot traffic for genuine antiques." She blinked. "So I didn't just destroy... You destroyed a $1,500 reproduction. Still expensive, still careless, but not catastrophic." He stood up and Lila realized he was tall. Not absurdly tall, but tall enough that standing changed the entire geometry of the room. The sculpture you knocked off the shelf, however, was real. 18th century ivory. That one you'll be paying for. Lila looked down at the broken pieces near her feet. "How much?" "We'll discuss it if you survive the next 10 minutes. He walked around his desk, moving with the kind of precision that made every step look intentional. "Tell me, Miss Bennett, do you make a habit of destroying things, or is today special?" "I'm not usually this much of a disaster," Lila said, then immediately regretted it because that sounded defensive and desperate. "I mean, I'm competent, I'm organized, You're standing in a pile of broken porcelain and your own resume." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see a small scar near his left eyebrow. "You're wearing shoes that don't fit and a dress with a stain on it. Your portfolio appears to have been held together with hope and a broken zipper. Every reference I can see from here has a coffee ring on it." Lila felt her face getting hot. "I can explain." "Don't." He crouched down, actually crouched, which brought him to eye level in a way that was more unnerving than when he'd been standing, and picked up one of her resume pages. He read it in silence for a moment. Bachelor's degree in mathematics from Columbia, full scholarship. Graduated summa cum laude. 3 years experience in financial analysis at Morrison and Hecht before they went under last year. He looked up at her. Why are you applying for an administrative assistant position when you're overqualified for half the management roles in this building? Because I need a job, Lila said honestly. And nobody wants to hire someone whose last employer was indicted for fraud, even if I had nothing to do with it. You worked in their accounting department. I worked in data analysis. I found the irregularities and reported them. Then the FBI found worse irregularities and the whole company collapsed. She met his eyes because at this point she had nothing left to lose. I did the right thing, and it destroyed my career. So now I'm starting over, and apparently I'm doing that by demolishing your office. Something changed in Dante's expression. Not softening. He didn't look like someone who softened, but something shifted, like he'd just confirmed a theory. You reported the fraud, he said. Yes. Knowing it would cost you your job. I reported it because it was going to cost people their retirement savings if someone didn't. Lila heard her voice getting stronger, which was dangerous, but she couldn't seem to stop it. I didn't know it would collapse the whole company. I thought they'd fix it. I was wrong. Dante stood up, still holding her resume. And now you're broke, unhireable, and desperate enough to work for me. I researched your company, Lila said. Morelli Enterprises owns 17 subsidiary businesses, 6 commercial properties, and has a reputation for aggressive expansion but clean books. On paper, you run a legitimate operation. On paper, Dante repeated, and there might have been amusement in his voice. Might have been. I need a job, Lila said again. I'm good at what I do. I'm detail-oriented, I'm fast, and I don't ask questions I don't need answers to. That last part is a lie. You've already asked my receptionist questions. I asked her name, which she didn't give you because I don't pay her to make friends. He walked back to his desk, somehow managing to avoid every piece of broken porcelain without looking down. I've had 4 administrative assistants in the past 2 years. 1 quit after 3 days. 1 lasted a week before developing a nervous condition. 1 made the mistake of being late twice. The 4th one tried to steal from me. What happened to them? The first 3 found other employment. The 4th is no longer a concern. He sat down, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Sit. Lila looked at the chair, then at the wreckage between her and it. She picked her way across the floor carefully, trying not to step on anything else, and lowered herself into the chair. It was exactly as uncomfortable as it looked. Dante opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin folder. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Answer them honestly. If I think you're lying, this interview is over and you'll never work in this city again. Understood? Lila's mouth went dry. Understood. First question, why did you really come here today? I told you, You need a job, yes, but you've applied to 43 companies in the past 6 months. I know this because I had someone pull your credit report and background check yesterday. He leaned back in his chair. 37 of those applications were for positions similar to what you had before. 5 were lateral moves. Only 1, this one, was a significant step down. So I'll ask again, why here? Lila took a breath. The truth or a lie? She was reasonably sure he'd know the difference. Because everyone else sees my resume and thinks I'm either incompetent or criminal, she said. The Fraud Association killed me before I could defend myself. But your company, you have a reputation for hiring people other companies won't touch. You've got 3 executives who came from companies that collapsed. You hired a woman who'd been fired from 6 jobs before landing here. Either you're incredibly forgiving or you don't care about conventional hiring practices. Or I value competence over credentials. That too. Lila met his eyes. I'm gambling that you're the kind of person who judges people by what they can do, not what someone else did. Dante was quiet for a moment. Then, second question. What's the real reason Morrison and Hecht collapsed? The fraud investigation. That's the official reason. What's the real one? Lila hesitated. This felt like a test, but she didn't know what answer he was looking for. The fraud was real, she said slowly, but it wasn't the whole picture. Morrison had borrowed heavily to cover expansion costs. When the investigation froze their assets, they couldn't make payroll. That triggered a cascade. Clients pulled out, creditors called in debts, and the whole structure collapsed in 3 weeks. The fraud lit the match, but the company was already soaked in gasoline. You saw that coming? It wasn't a question, but Lila answered anyway. I saw the pattern 6 months before it happened. I reported it internally. Nobody listened. Why not? Because I was 26 years old and telling executives twice my age that they were running the company into the ground. They thought I was being dramatic. Lila heard the bitterness in her voice and tried to pull it back. They were wrong. I was right. None of that mattered in the end. Dante picked up a pen from his desk and clicked it once. The sound was sharp in the quiet office. Third question. If I hire you and you find irregularities in my company's books, what will you do? This was the real test. Lila knew it. I'd report it to you, she said, directly, and then I'd help you fix it. Not the authorities? Not unless you told me to. Lila leaned forward slightly. I learned my lesson at Morrison. Going over someone's head doesn't fix the problem, it just creates chaos. If I work for you, I work for you. Not the FBI, not the SEC, not anyone else. That's either loyalty or moral flexibility. It's practicality, Lila said. I can't fix problems from the outside. I can only fix them if I'm trusted enough to be on the inside. Dante clicked the pen again. Once, twice, then he set it down carefully on the desk, aligned perfectly with the edge of his notebook. You start Monday, he said, 8 a.m. sharp, not 8:15, not 7:45, 8 exactly. Lila felt something in her chest unclench. Thank you. I won't. Your salary will be $60,000 annually. Health insurance starts after 90 days. You'll report directly to me, which means you'll work longer hours than anyone else in this building, and you'll handle information that could put you in danger if it reaches the wrong people. You will not discuss my business outside this office. You will not ask questions about operations that don't concern you, and you will not, under any circumstances, break anything else in my office. I understand. You'll sign an NDA so comprehensive that your lawyer will advise you not to sign it. You'll do it anyway because you need this job more than you need legal protection. He stood up. The ivory sculpture you broke was worth $4,000. I'm deducting it from your first 3 paychecks. The vase was my mistake for putting a replica in a high-traffic area. We'll call it even. Lila stood up too, trying not to let the relief show too obviously on her face. Thank you, Mr. Morelli. Don't thank me yet. You haven't survived a full day. He walked to the door and opened it. Claire will send you the employment paperwork. Read everything. Sign nothing until you're sure. Claire? My receptionist. The woman whose name you asked for. Right. Lila gathered up her scattered papers, trying to maintain some dignity while crawling around on the floor. She managed to get everything back into her portfolio, though the broken zipper meant she had to hold it closed with both hands. When she reached the door, Dante spoke again. Miss Bennett. She turned back. The real reason I'm hiring you isn't your credentials or your desperation, he said. It's because you reported the fraud at Morrison, even though you knew it would cost you everything. Most people don't have that kind of spine. I need someone who does. Lila didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Lila bought new shoes, actual professional shoes that fit, and 2 more dresses that didn't have stains. She read through the NDA that Claire emailed her, all 47 pages of it, and signed it anyway because Dante had been right. She needed this job more than she needed legal protection. Monday morning arrived with rain. Lila stood outside Morelli Tower at 7:45, holding an umbrella that had already turned inside out once in the wind, and watched the building loom above her like a monument to intimidation. The lobby was all marble and steel, with security guards who checked IDs like they were guarding nuclear codes. She made it to the 47th floor at 7:58. Claire was already at her desk, looking exactly as severe as she had during the interview. She glanced at Lila, then at the clock on her computer screen. You're early. I thought early was on time here. Early is acceptable. On time is mandatory. Late is terminal. Claire handed her a key card and a thin folder. Your desk is in the alcove outside Mr. Morelli's office. You have access to the 47th floor, the executive conference room on 46, and the records archive on 42. Anywhere else requires written authorization. Your computer login is in the folder. Change the password immediately. Mr. Morelli will be in at 8. He expects coffee, black, no sugar, temperature between 180 and 185 degrees, on his desk at 8:01. Not 8 o'clock. Not 8:02. Where do I... Claire pointed to a door marked Executive Break Room. There's a thermometer in the drawer next to the espresso machine. Use it. Lila took the folder and the key card and made her way to the break room, which was less a room and more a shrine to expensive appliances. The espresso machine looked like it could launch a satellite. She found the thermometer, made the coffee, checked the temperature twice, and delivered it to Dante's desk at exactly 8:01. His office was empty. She set the coffee down carefully, far away from any expensive objects, and retreated to her new desk. The alcove was small but efficiently designed. Her desk faced a window with a view of the city that probably cost extra in real estate terms. There was a computer, a phone with more buttons than seemed necessary, and a stack of files labeled Urgent. Lila sat down, logged into the computer, and opened the first file. It was a shipping manifest for one of Morelli's subsidiary companies. Nothing obviously wrong with it, just standard logistics documentation. She cross-referenced it against the company's declared inventory. The numbers didn't match, not dramatically, just slightly. A shipment of textiles that was supposed to contain 500 units actually contained 487. The difference had been noted but not explained. Lila pulled up another manifest. Same company, different month. Another small discrepancy. 13 units short. She opened a spreadsheet and started building a pattern analysis. You've been here for 20 minutes and you're already looking for problems. Lila jumped. Dante was standing in the doorway to his office, holding the coffee she'd delivered. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his expression that might have been approval. I'm just reviewing the files you marked urgent, Lila said. Those files are 6 months old. They're not urgent. They're a test. He took a sip of coffee. 184 degrees, acceptable. You tested the temperature? I test everything. He walked to her desk and looked at her computer screen. What did you find? Small inventory discrepancies across multiple shipments from Arcadia Textiles. Nothing major but consistent. Either their counting system is broken or someone's skimming. Which do you think it is? If it was a counting error, it would be random. This is too consistent. Someone's taking a little bit from every shipment because they think small losses won't be noticed. Dante set his coffee down on her desk. How much have they taken in total? Lila pulled up her quick calculation. Over 6 months? Approximately $32,000 worth of inventory, assuming standard wholesale pricing. Who's doing it? I'd need access to employee records and shipping schedules to narrow it down. Probably someone in the warehouse with authorization to adjust counts. You've been at this desk for 20 minutes, Dante said quietly. My last assistant didn't catch this in 6 months of looking at the same files. Your last assistant might not have been looking for patterns. She was looking for exactly this. I told her to. He picked up his coffee again. The difference is that she wasn't good at it, and you are. Lila felt a small surge of pride, followed immediately by suspicion. You already knew about the discrepancies. I've known for 8 months. I wanted to see how long it would take you to find them. That's... Lila stopped herself before saying something that would get her fired on her first day. That's very thorough of you. I don't hire people I haven't tested, and I don't trust people until they've proven they're worth trusting. He started walking back to his office, then paused. Fix the Arcadia problem, quietly. I don't want the person responsible to know they've been caught until I decide what to do about it. How do you want me to... You're smart enough to find the problem. Be smart enough to fix it. He disappeared into his office and closed the door. Lila stared at the closed door for a moment, then back at her computer screen. She pulled up employee records, shipping schedules, and warehouse access logs. It took her 3 hours of cross-referencing and building timelines. But she found him. Marcus Renton, warehouse supervisor, who'd been with the company for 6 years and had access to inventory systems. He was adjusting counts after shipments were loaded, but before they were logged, skimming just enough that it looked like rounding errors. She wrote up a brief report with evidence and left it on Dante's desk while he was in a meeting. When he came back, he read it in silence, then called her into his office. You're certain? Unless he's being very elaborately framed, yes. What would you do about it? Lila hesitated. Fire him and report it to the police? Why? Because he's stealing from you. He's stealing $32,000 over 6 months. That's roughly $5,000 a month. Do you know what I spend on office coffee in a month? I'm guessing more than $5,000. Significantly more. So why does this matter? Lila thought about it. Because it's not about the money. It's about the principle. If people think they can steal from you without consequences, more people will try. Better. Dante leaned back in his chair. What else? If he's stealing inventory, he might be selling it somewhere, which means he has a buyer, which means there's a leak in your supply chain that could be exploited for worse things than textiles. There it is. Dante stood up. I don't care about Marcus Renton. I care about the infrastructure that allowed him to operate for 8 months without being caught. Fix the infrastructure. How? Implement a verification system, random audits, dual authorization for count adjustments. Make it harder to cheat than to do the job correctly. He walked to the window. And then fire Renton, but do it quietly. No police, no drama. I'll handle the rest. Lila felt cold. What does handle the rest mean? Dante turned to look at her. It means you don't ask questions you don't want answered. She thought about arguing, about pointing out that if they didn't report it, Renton could just do the same thing somewhere else. But she remembered what she'd said in the interview. If I work for you, I work for you. I'll implement the new system this week, she said. Good. He walked back to his desk. And Miss Bennett? Yes? Don't lose sleep over Marcus Renton. Trust me when I say he won't be a problem anymore. Lila left the office, went back to her desk, and tried very hard not to think about what that meant. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that was equal parts productive and unsettling. Lila arrived at 7:55 every morning, made Dante's coffee at precisely the right temperature, and worked through problems that ranged from mundane administrative tasks to complex financial analysis that seemed designed to test the limits of her patience and intelligence. Dante was demanding in a way that felt personal. He didn't just want work done. He wanted it done perfectly, efficiently, and often under conditions that seemed deliberately designed to be difficult. He'd give her assignments with missing information and expect her to find it. He'd ask for analysis without telling her what he was looking for and then critique her for not reading his mind. And yet, there were moments when he'd review her work and nod slightly, which she'd learned was the equivalent of effusive praise from anyone else. Moments when he'd ask her opinion on something and actually listen to her answer. Moments when she'd catch him looking at her with an expression that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't dismissal either. The office itself was strange. People moved through the building like they were walking on eggshells, speaking in low voices and avoiding eye contact in elevators. She'd heard whispers about Dante in the break room, rumors that ranged from plausible to absurd. Some people said he'd built his empire from nothing. Others said he'd inherited it from his father, who'd been even worse. Everyone agreed that crossing him was a career-ending mistake at best, and something worse at worst. Lila tried not to think about it too hard. She was good at her job. That was what mattered. She fixed problems, streamlined processes, and caught mistakes before they became disasters. She learned to anticipate what Dante needed before he asked for it, learned to read his moods in the small shifts of his expression, learned to exist in the controlled chaos of his world without getting crushed by it. And then, 6 weeks into her employment, she found something she wasn't supposed to find. It was late. Almost 8 p.m. Most of the office had cleared out hours ago, but Dante was still in a meeting and Lila was working through a backlog of expense reports that had been flagged for review. Routine stuff. Travel expenses, client entertainment, equipment purchases. Except one report didn't make sense. A subsidiary company called Meridian Holdings had submitted an expense report for $127,000 in consulting fees. That alone wasn't unusual. Companies hired consultants all the time. But when Lila pulled up Meridian's financial records to cross-reference, she found something odd. The consulting fees had been paid to a company called Apex Advisory Group. She'd never heard of them, which meant either they were new or they were small enough not to register in standard business databases. She ran a search. Apex Advisory Group didn't exist. No business registration, no tax filings, no corporate structure. It was a ghost. Lila felt her pulse quicken. This was either a clerical error or something much worse. She pulled up more records from Meridian. 3 more payments to Apex Advisory over the past 6 months, each between $100,000 and $150,000. Over $500,000 paid to a company that didn't exist. She cross-referenced Meridian's other expenses. Everything else looked normal. Standard operating costs, legitimate vendor relationships, clean accounting. Just these 4 payments stood out like neon signs in a dark room. Lila sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. This was wrong. Either someone at Meridian was running a scheme or the money was going somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. And if Dante knew about it, if this was intentional, then she'd just stumbled into something that could get her killed. She should close the file, forget she saw it, go home. Instead, she kept digging. She pulled up shipping records for Meridian. They were a logistics company. Warehouses, distribution, transport. She cross-referenced their shipping manifests with their financial records, looking for patterns. There. Shipments that didn't match the declared inventory. Routes that took longer than they should. Warehouses that were listed as operational but had minimal activity in the logs. This wasn't just fraud. This was something bigger. Working late. Lila's heart nearly stopped. She looked up to find Dante standing in the doorway, his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up. He looked tired in a way she'd never seen him look tired before. "I was just finishing the expense reports," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Find anything interesting?" This was the moment, the decision that would define everything that came next. She could lie, close the file, pretend she hadn't seen anything, or she could tell the truth and find out what kind of man Dante Morelli really was. Lila turned her computer screen toward him. "Meridian Holdings has been paying consulting fees to a company that doesn't exist," she said. "Over $500,000 in 6 months. The money's going somewhere, but I can't trace it without access to Meridian's bank records." Dante walked to her desk slowly. He looked at the screen, his expression unreadable. "And what do you think that means?" he asked quietly. "I think someone's either stealing from you or laundering money through your company," Lila said. "Or both. Which do you think it is?" "I think it's something you already know about, and I just walked into something I shouldn't have." Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and closed the file on her screen. "Go home, Miss Bennett. I can help. Go home." His voice wasn't angry. It was something worse than angry. It was careful. "We'll discuss this tomorrow." Lila saved her work, shut down her computer, and gathered her things. She could feel Dante watching her as she left, but when she turned back at the elevator, his office door was already closed. She didn't sleep that night. Lila arrived at the office the next morning at 7:30, half expecting to find her keycard deactivated and a security guard waiting to escort her out of the building. Instead, everything worked normally. The elevator took her to the 47th floor. Her computer logged in without issue. Dante's office door was closed, but there was light underneath it. She made his coffee, checked the temperature twice, and knocked on his door at exactly 8:01. "Come in." Dante was standing at the window with his back to the door, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city like he was trying to find something specific in the chaos of buildings and traffic below. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Set it on the desk," he said. Lila put the coffee down and started to leave. "Stay." She stopped, her hand still on the door handle. Her heart was doing something erratic in her chest that felt like panic trying to disguise itself as professionalism. Dante turned around. He looked like he hadn't slept either, though he wore exhaustion better than most people wore suits. There were shadows under his eyes that made them look darker, sharper. "Tell me what you think you found," he said. "Payments to a non-existent consulting company funneled through Meridian Holdings. Over $500,000 in 6 months. Shipping irregularities that suggest the warehouses are being used for something other than their stated purpose." Lila kept her voice level. "Either someone's running an operation under your nose or you're running it yourself. And if it's the second one, then I need to know what I walked into." Dante moved to his desk and sat down. He picked up the coffee, took a sip, set it down with the handle aligned exactly parallel to the edge of his desk blotter. Everything he did had that same precision, like chaos was something that happened to other people. "Sit," he said. Lila sat in the chair across from him, the same uncomfortable chair from her interview. It felt like a test she hadn't studied for. "What do you know about my family?" Dante asked. "I know your father started Morelli Enterprises 30 years ago. I know he died 8 years ago and you took over. I know you expanded the business significantly since then." My father didn't start a business. He inherited an empire. Dante's voice was flat, factual. My grandfather ran operations in this city that made him very rich and very dangerous. When he died, my father took over. When my father died, it fell to me and my brother. Lila felt something cold settle in her stomach. Operations. You're smart enough to know what I'm talking about. Don't make me spell it out. Your family was involved in organized crime. Is involved, present tense. Dante leaned back in his chair. Though we're working on changing that. Some parts of the business are legitimate now. Others are in transition. And some, like Meridian, are still being used for purposes that wouldn't pass an audit. You're laundering money. I'm cleaning up a mess I inherited. There's a difference. He picked up a pen from his desk and turned it over in his fingers. When my father died, I had two choices. I could walk away and let the whole structure collapse into chaos, or I could take control and try to build something that wouldn't eventually put everyone I care about in prison or in the ground. I chose the second option. Why are you telling me this? Because you found it on your own, which means you're either going to be an asset or a liability. I'm giving you the option to choose which one. Lila's mouth was dry. And if I choose to walk away? Then you'll sign an expanded NDA, take a generous severance package, and never speak about what you found. You'll also never work in this city again because I'll make sure every company you apply to knows you can't be trusted with sensitive information. That's not exactly a choice. No, Dante agreed. It's not. But it's more of a choice than most people in your position would get. Lila looked at him across the desk. This man who'd hired her when no one else would, who'd tested her and pushed her and somehow seen something in her that she'd stopped seeing in herself. He was offering her a place in something that could destroy her life. Or he was offering her a chance to be part of something that mattered, even if it was complicated and dangerous and probably illegal. What would you need me to do? She asked. Something changed in Dante's expression. Not relief. He didn't seem like someone who felt relief, but something close to it. The same thing you've been doing. Find problems. Fix them. Help me transition the business into something legitimate before the weight of what my father built drags us all down. That's not an administrative assistant job. You haven't been doing an administrative assistant job since your first day. You've been doing forensic accounting and operational analysis. I just didn't tell you that's what it was called. And the things I find, like Meridian, you bring them to me. We figure out together how to solve them without triggering a cascade that destroys everything we're trying to build. Dante set the pen down carefully. I won't lie to you about what this business is, but I also won't ask you to do anything that crosses lines you're not willing to cross. You want to be on the inside fixing problems? This is your chance, but you need to decide now. Lila thought about Morrison and Hecht, about reporting fraud and watching the whole company burn because she'd thought doing the right thing would matter. She thought about the past 6 months of rejection and desperation, about being 27 years old and feeling like her career was already over before it had really started. I want access to all the financial records, she said. Not just the files you give me, everything. If I'm going to help you clean this up, I need to see the whole picture. Agreed. And I want your word that you're actually trying to go legitimate. That this isn't just you telling me what I want to hear, so I'll help you hide evidence. Dante stood up and walked around the desk. He extended his hand. You have my word. And in my world, that's worth more than a contract. Lila stood up and shook his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and he held on for a second longer than strictly necessary, like he was sealing something more than just a business agreement. Welcome to the inside, Miss Bennett, he said. Try not to break anything important. Over the next several weeks, Lila discovered that the inside of Dante's world was significantly more complicated than the outside had suggested. She got access to file systems she hadn't known existed, financial records that painted a picture of an organization in the middle of a slow, painful transformation. Some subsidiary companies were completely clean, legitimate businesses that operated exactly as they appeared to. Others were in various stages of transition, with revenue streams being shifted, partnerships being dissolved, operations being restructured, and then there were the ones like Meridian. Lila spent her days tracking money through increasingly complex networks, identifying which operations could be salvaged and which needed to be shut down entirely. It was like trying to untangle a knot while someone kept adding more string, and every thread she pulled revealed another problem that needed solving. Dante worked beside her through most of it, which surprised her. She'd expected him to delegate, to give orders from his office while she did the actual work. Instead, he'd pull up a chair next to her desk and review documents with her, talking through problems and solutions like they were colleagues instead of boss and employee. "This warehouse in Brooklyn," Lila said one afternoon, pointing at a property record on her screen. "It's listed as a storage facility for Meridian, but the utilities usage doesn't match. It's pulling way more power than a storage facility should need." Dante leaned closer to look at the screen. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. "What do you think it's being used for?" he asked. "Either they're running equipment in there that isn't on the books, or someone's using it for something that requires a lot of electricity. Grow operation, maybe? Or a manufacturing setup?" "Neither. It's a gambling operation. Cards, sports betting, some loan sharking on the side." Dante sat back. "My uncle runs it. Has for 20 years. "Your uncle?" "My father's brother. He's not interested in going legitimate, and he's got enough leverage in the family that forcing him out would start a war I don't need right now." Lila pulled up more records. "How much is this operation worth annually?" "About $2 million in profit, most of it unreported." "And you're just letting it run?" "I'm picking my battles. The gambling operation is small enough that it's not drawing federal attention. My uncle keeps it contained, doesn't expand, doesn't get greedy. It's a problem, but it's a stable problem. I've got bigger issues to deal with first." "Like what?" Dante stood up and walked to the window. It was something he did when he was thinking, like the view helped him organize his thoughts. Like the fact that my father made promises to people who don't care that he's dead. Like the fact that I've got suppliers who expect me to move products I don't want to move anymore. Like the fact that walking away from certain contracts would put a target on my back that would make running a legitimate business impossible. "What kind of products?" He turned to look at her. "Do you really want to know?" Lila thought about it. "Yes." "Stolen goods, mostly. High-end electronics, jewelry, art. Things that come in through the port and disappear before customs can track them properly. My father had relationships with people who specialize in that kind of acquisition, and they expect those relationships to continue." "Are they?" "For now. I've been slowly reducing our involvement, buying less, moving less, creating distance. But it's a process, and it's dangerous. These aren't people who respond well to being phased out." Lila turned back to her computer and started pulling up shipping records. "Show me which operations are involved. I'll see if I can find ways to create legitimate reasons for the reduction. Make it look like market forces instead of choice." Dante returned to her desk and spent the next 2 hours walking her through the shadow side of his business. He was matter-of-fact about it, neither defensive nor apologetic, just laying out the reality of what he'd inherited and what he was trying to change. By the time he finished, Lila had a headache and a much clearer understanding of why he'd seemed so tired that morning after she'd found the Meridian irregularities. "This is going to take years," she said. "I know. And there's no guarantee it'll work. Any one of these relationships could blow up and take the whole thing down." "I know that too." Dante looked at her. "Does that change your answer?" "About helping you?" Lila shook her head. "No, but it means we need to be smarter about how we approach it. Faster in some areas, slower in others. We need to prioritize based on risk, not revenue." "How would you prioritize?" Lila opened a new spreadsheet and started building a framework. "Operations that involve violence or exploitation get shut down first, regardless of profit. We can't claim to be going legitimate while still being involved in things that hurt people. Second priority is anything that's drawing law enforcement attention. Those are time bombs waiting to go off. Third is the high-risk, low-value operations that aren't worth the exposure. Everything else we phase out gradually, creating legitimate replacement revenue streams as we go." Dante watched her work, and when she looked up, there was something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "You just walked into organized crime, and your first instinct is to build an ethical framework for dismantling it. You said you wanted to go legitimate. That means having standards. Most people in your position would be looking for ways to profit from this information." "I'm not most people." Lila saved her spreadsheet. "And if I was interested in profiting from crime, I wouldn't have reported the fraud at Morrison." "No," Dante said quietly. You wouldn't have. He left her office without another word, but the next morning, Lila found her salary had been increased by $30,000 and her title had been changed to Director of Financial Operations. The work consumed her in a way nothing had since her early days at Morrison. She was solving puzzles that mattered, fixing problems that had real consequences, working alongside someone who treated her like an equal instead of an inconvenience. The hours were brutal, 12, 14-hour days were normal. But she didn't mind. This was what she was good at. This was where she belonged. And Dante, for all his control and precision and carefully maintained distance, was becoming something more than just her boss. She noticed small things, the way he'd bring her coffee in the afternoon when he knew she'd been staring at spreadsheets for too long. The way he'd ask her opinion on things that had nothing to do with business, books, music, whether the new restaurant on Fifth Avenue was worth the hype. The way he'd sometimes just sit in her office and work in silence, like he found the proximity comfortable. She noticed the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, with an expression that was something close to curiosity, mixed with something that looked almost like concern. 3 months into her new position, Lila was working late on a particularly complicated analysis of shipping routes when Dante appeared in her doorway holding 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than her first car. "Take a break," he said. "I'm almost done with this. You've been almost done with it for 3 hours. Take a break." Lila saved her work and accepted the glass he poured for her. The whiskey was smooth and warm and tasted like smoke and honey. "What are we drinking to?" she asked. "Progress. We closed down the first of the high-priority operations today. The import scheme through the port. That was on the timeline for next month. I moved it up. You were right about it being too high risk." Dante sat down in the chair across from her desk. "The people involved weren't happy, but they'll adjust." "How unhappy?" "Unhappy enough that I've got security on you for the next 2 weeks." Lila set her glass down. "Excuse me? The people we cut loose know you're the one who identified them as a liability. They're not going to do anything stupid, but I'm not taking chances with your safety." "You didn't think to discuss this with me first?" "I'm discussing it now." "After you already made the decision?" "Yes." Dante took a drink. "Because if I'd asked first, you would have argued that you don't need protection, and I would have disagreed, and we would have wasted time on a conversation that would end with me doing exactly what I'm doing now." "That's—" Lila stopped, because he wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. "I don't like being treated like I can't take care of myself. I'm treating you like you're important to this operation, and I can't afford to lose you. There's a difference." "Is there?" Dante leaned forward. "I've had 4 administrative assistants in 2 years. 3 quit because they couldn't handle the pressure, and 1 tried to steal from me. You've been here for 3 months, and you've identified problems that have been bleeding this company for years. You've built frameworks for transitioning operations that my own financial team couldn't figure out. You've challenged me on decisions and been right more often than wrong. So yes, there's a difference. I need you here, which means I need you safe." Lila picked up her glass again, mostly to give herself something to do with her hands. "I appreciate that, but I still don't like being told instead of asked." "Noted." Dante's mouth quirked slightly, which was the closest he usually came to a smile. "I'll try to remember that the next time your life is potentially in danger." "See that you do." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking expensive whiskey and watching the city lights through her office window. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said. "That depends on the question. You said your brother was supposed to inherit this with you. What happened to him?" Dante's expression went very still. "He died." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "He was killed 5 years ago during a dispute with a rival organization over territory." Dante looked down at his glass. "He was the one who was supposed to take over the legitimate side of the business. He was good with people, good at negotiation, good at building relationships that didn't involve threats. I was the one who was supposed to handle the other side, enforcement, operations, the parts that required someone who could make difficult decisions without hesitating." "But he died and you got both." "He died, and I inherited a world I was only half prepared for. The violent half I understood. The part where you build something instead of just protecting it, that was his skill, not mine." Lila thought about that. About Dante, who was so controlled and precise and careful, trying to build something legitimate with tools designed for violence. You're doing better than you think, she said. Am I? You hired me. You're listening to analysis instead of just making decisions based on power and fear. You're shutting down operations that hurt people even though they're profitable. That's not someone who's failing at building something legitimate. That's someone who's actually trying. Dante looked at her for a long moment. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then it's a good thing I'm here to balance it out. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, and whatever he saw there made his expression close down into something harder. I have to go, he said, standing up. Don't work too late. Where are you going? Dealing with someone who's unhappy about our recent operational changes. He set his glass down on her desk. The security team will be outside the building when you leave. Don't try to lose them. I wouldn't dream of it, Lila said, which was a lie, and they both knew it. After he left, she sat alone in her office and finished her whiskey and tried not to think too hard about the fact that Dante was walking into something dangerous while she was sitting safely in a building surrounded by security. The next morning, he showed up to the office with bruised knuckles and didn't explain. Lila didn't ask, but she noticed the way he moved more carefully, the way he held his coffee cup with his left hand instead of his right, the way his jaw was slightly swollen on one side. She also noticed the way the whispers in the office had changed. People were scared before, but now they were scared in a different way, respectful, like something had shifted in the invisible hierarchy that governed this world. What happened last night? She asked Claire when Dante was in a meeting. Mister, Morelli reminded someone why they shouldn't test his patience, Claire said without looking up from her computer. That's all you need to know. Was anyone seriously hurt? Define seriously. Claire. The older woman finally looked up and her expression was almost sympathetic. You're getting attached to him. That's a mistake. I'm not. You are. I've watched 4 assistants come through here. The first 3 were terrified of him. The 4th thought she could manipulate him. You're the first one who looks at him like he's human. Claire's voice was quiet. He is human, but he's also dangerous. Don't forget which one matters more in this world. Lila went back to her desk and tried to focus on work, but Claire's words stayed with her. That evening, after most of the office had cleared out, Dante called her into his office. We need to talk about Meridian, he said. Lila sat down. What about it? I'm shutting it down completely. The operation has too many vulnerabilities and not enough legitimate value. I'm liquidating the assets and distributing them to the cleaner subsidiaries. That's going to leave a gap in your distribution network. I'll fill it with legitimate contracts. It'll take time, but it's cleaner than trying to transition Meridian piece by piece. When? End of the month, which gives you 3 weeks to figure out how to redistribute the legitimate operations and sever ties with everything else. But he slid a folder across the desk. This is everything you'll need. Employee contracts, vendor agreements, property leases. I need you to find ways to end them that don't create legal exposure or trigger retaliation. Lila opened the folder and started scanning the documents. It was a nightmare of interconnected agreements and informal arrangements that would be nearly impossible to untangle cleanly. This is going to take more than 3 weeks, she said. I know, do what you can. I'll handle the rest. When you say you'll handle the rest, I mean, I'll handle it in ways you don't need to know about. Dante's voice was firm. I appreciate that you want to be involved in everything, but there are parts of this business that I'm not bringing you into, for your own protection and mine. Lila wanted to argue, but she could see in his expression that it wouldn't matter. He'd already made the decision, and like most of his decisions, it was final. Fine, she said. But if this goes wrong because I didn't have all the information, that's on you. Noted. She took the folder back to her desk and spent the next 2 weeks building exit strategies for every contract and agreement tied to Meridian. Some were straightforward, leases that could be terminated with proper notice, vendor agreements that had standard cancellation clauses. Others required creativity, finding legal justifications for breach, offering settlements that were generous enough to avoid litigation, creating paper trails that would hold up under scrutiny. She worked late every night, often until the cleaning crew started their rounds. Dante usually worked late too, and sometimes he'd come to her office around 9 or 10 with coffee or food he'd ordered in, and they'd work in parallel silence that had become comfortable. On the night before the Meridian closure was scheduled to finalize, Lila was reviewing the last of the contract terminations when Dante appeared in her doorway, looking more tense than she'd ever seen him. "We have a problem," he said. Lila's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves someone finding out about the Meridian closure before it's final and deciding to make a move." He walked to her desk. "I need you to go home. Now." "What's happening?" "Nothing you need to be involved in. Go home, lock your doors, and don't answer if anyone you don't recognize tries to contact you." "Dante, this isn't a discussion, Lila." He used her first name, which he almost never did. "There are people who are very unhappy about the changes we're making, and they've decided tonight is when they're going to express that displeasure. I need you somewhere safe while I deal with it." "I can help." "You can't. Not with this." He pulled out his phone and texted someone. "Security is waiting downstairs. They'll take you home and stay outside your building until I give them the all clear." "How long will that be?" "However long it takes." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like fear, which terrified her because Dante Morelli didn't get scared. "Please, for once, just do what I'm asking without arguing." Lila gathered her things and let security escort her home. She didn't sleep. She sat on her couch with her phone in her hand, waiting for news that didn't come. At 2 a.m, she was still awake, staring at her phone and trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. At 2:47, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it anyway. "Miss Bennett." The voice was unfamiliar, male, with an accent she couldn't place. "You've been causing problems for some important people. Who is this?" "Someone who thinks you should reconsider your employment choices. Mr. Morelli's plans are disruptive to established arrangements. You're helping him disrupt them. That makes you a problem." Lila's hand tightened on the phone. "If you have an issue with what we're doing, take it up with Dante." "Oh, we are. Right now, in fact. But we wanted to make sure you understood that your involvement has consequences. Think carefully about whether working for Mr. Morelli is worth what it might cost you." The line went dead. Lila sat frozen for a moment, then called Dante. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. She called the security team outside her building. No answer. She grabbed her keys and her phone and ran. The warehouse sat in a part of the city that looked like it had been left behind when everything else moved forward. Cracked pavement, rusted fencing, buildings with broken windows that stared out like empty eye sockets. Lila sat in the passenger seat of Dante's car, a black sedan that was somehow more intimidating than a sports car would have been, and tried to control her breathing. "This is a mistake," she said for the third time since they'd left the office. "Probably," Dante said without looking at her. His eyes were on the building ahead, a 3-story structure with faded paint and a loading dock that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "But we're here now." 3 hours earlier, Lila had been at her desk when Dante had emerged from his office with his jacket on and his expression set in that particular way that meant arguing would be pointless. "We're going to Meridian," he'd said. "The warehouse? Why?" "Because you found something that needs addressing, and I'd rather address it in person than over the phone." He gestured toward the elevator. "Unless you'd prefer to stay here and wonder what happens next." She'd gone with him because the alternative was worse. Now sitting outside a building that looked like the setting for every crime thriller she'd ever tried not to watch, Lila was reconsidering that decision. "What exactly are we addressing?" she asked. "The truth." Dante opened his door. "Stay close to me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if something goes wrong, run." "If something goes wrong, running seems like run," Dante repeated and got out of the car. Lila followed because, at this point, following seemed safer than being left alone in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered like they were trying to warn people away. The warehouse entrance was a metal door with a keypad that Dante unlocked with a code he punched in without hesitation. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old concrete. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, half of them dead, the others casting everything in a sickly yellow-green glow. Their footsteps echoed. "Mr. Morelli." A man emerged from an office near the back, middle-aged, wearing a suit that had been expensive once but now just looked tired. "We weren't expecting you. That's the point of unannounced visits, Gerald." Dante's voice was pleasant in a way that made Lila's skin crawl. "This is Miss Bennett, my assistant. She's been reviewing Meridian's books." Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything should be in order. Should be, Dante agreed. But Miss Bennett found some discrepancies. Consulting fees paid to a company called Apex Advisory. You're familiar with them? The smile froze on Gerald's face. Of course. They handle logistics consulting for our overseas operations. Interesting, because Apex Advisory doesn't exist. Dante walked past Gerald into the office, and Lila followed, her heart hammering. No business registration, no tax filings, no corporate presence anywhere. So either you've been paying $500,000 to a ghost, or you've been moving money somewhere it's not supposed to go. Gerald's face had gone pale. There must be some mistake in the paperwork. There's no mistake. Dante sat down in Gerald's chair like he owned it, which technically he did. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly where that money went and who authorized the payments. And then you're going to tell me what else you've been running through this warehouse that isn't on the books. I don't know what you're... Dante's hand came down on the desk hard enough that Lila flinched. Gerald went silent. Don't insult me, Dante said quietly. I've known about the fake consulting fees for 2 months. I've known about the inventory discrepancies for longer than that. What I haven't known is whether you were running this on your own or if someone else gave you the idea. Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Victor Raines, he said finally. He approached me 6 months ago, said he needed to move some product through our distribution network, offered me 20% of the take. What product? I don't know. I never asked. He told me to process the shipments, adjust the manifests, and route the payments through Apex. That's all. Dante was very still. Victor Raines, he repeated. My former business partner, Victor Raines. The one I severed ties with 3 years ago because he was moving into operations I wanted no part of. He said you'd made a deal. I made no deal. Dante stood up. Where are the shipments going? I have addresses. In the system. Gerald's hands were shaking as he pulled up files on his computer. Here, 3 locations in the Port District. He said they were temporary storage before final distribution. Dante leaned over the desk, reading the screen. His jaw tightened. These are residential addresses. I didn't think to check. You didn't think at all. Dante straightened up. How many shipments have gone through? 15, maybe 20. Maybe? 23 total. The last one went out 2 days ago. Dante turned to Lila. Do you have your phone? She nodded, pulling it out with hands that were steadier than she felt. Take pictures of everything on that screen. Addresses, dates, shipment manifests. All of it. Lila moved to the computer and started photographing while Gerald sat frozen in his chair, looking like a man watching his life collapse in real time. What happens now? Gerald asked. Now you're going to tell me everyone who was involved in this operation, Dante said. Names, positions, how much they knew. And then you're going to resign, effective immediately, and disappear somewhere I'll never have to see you again. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure Victor Raines knows you gave me his distribution addresses. Let's see how generous his 20% looks when he finds out you compromised his entire operation. Gerald's face went from pale to gray. He'll kill me. Yes, Dante said simply. He will. Which is why you're going to take the resignation option and leave the city before he realizes what happened here. I need time. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, you're on your own. Lila finished photographing the information and stepped back from the computer. Dante gestured toward the door. They walked out of the warehouse in silence, back through the flickering lights, past the empty loading dock, into the cold night air that suddenly felt clean after the stale atmosphere inside. In the car, Lila finally found her voice. Victor Raines. Who is he? Someone who used to be useful and is now a problem. Dante started the engine. Someone who apparently thinks he can use my infrastructure for his business without me noticing. What kind of business? Dante pulled out of the lot. The kind that uses residential addresses as distribution points and pays in cash through fake companies. Lila's stomach turned. Drugs? Probably. Or weapons. Or people. Victor's never been particular about his revenue streams as long as they're profitable. Dante's hands were tight on the wheel. And he's using my company to do it, which means if the authorities find those shipments, they'll trace them back to Meridian, back to me. We need to report this. To who? Dante's voice was sharp. The police? And tell them what? That my warehouse manager was running an illegal operation through my company? That I somehow didn't notice $500,000 moving through fake accounts? They'll investigate me, Lila. Not Victor. Me. But you didn't know I own the company. I'm responsible for what happens in it. That's how this works. He turned onto the highway, driving faster than was probably safe. Victor knows that. He's counting on it. If he gets caught, I take the fall. If he doesn't, he keeps using my infrastructure and I'm complicit whether I want to be or not. Lila thought about that. So what do? We find out exactly what he's moving and where it's going, and then we shut him down before he drags me into something I can't get out of. How? Dante glanced at her. You wanted to be on the inside, Miss Bennett? Congratulations. You're about to see how things actually work. They drove back to the office in silence. It was past 11 when they arrived, the building mostly dark except for security lights and a few scattered windows where other people were working late or pretending to. In Dante's office, Lila pulled up the photos she'd taken on her phone while Dante poured himself a drink from a cabinet she hadn't known existed. Whiskey? He offered. I don't drink. You might want to start. But he didn't push it. He sat down across from her and gestured to her phone. Show me. Lila pulled up the addresses. 3 locations in the Port District, all residential buildings. Older construction, probably low-income housing based on the neighborhoods. Front operations, Dante said. Victor's using them as temporary holding points. Shipments come in, get broken down into smaller packages, then distributed through local networks. Clean enough that it doesn't look like organized crime, dirty enough that the people living there are probably too scared to report it. We need to see what's actually in those shipments. No, I need to see. You need to stay out of this. Lila looked up from her phone. You brought me into this. You can't just... I brought you into the investigation, not into whatever comes next. Dante drained his glass and set it down harder than necessary. Victor Raines is dangerous. Not in the way most criminals are dangerous, not stupid or impulsive. He's smart. He plans. And he doesn't leave witnesses when things go wrong. All the more reason you shouldn't go alone. I'm not going alone. I'm bringing people who are equipped to handle this kind of situation. People like who? Dante smiled, and it was the first time Lila had seen him smile in a way that looked genuinely dangerous. People you don't want to meet, Miss Bennett. I'm not a child. Can you handle watching someone get hurt? Because that's what happens in this world. Can you handle being in a room where violence is the expected outcome? Can you handle the fact that the law doesn't apply the same way once you cross certain lines? Lila felt cold. What are you saying? I'm saying that I kept you away from the darker parts of this business because you don't belong there. You're good at numbers and patterns and finding problems. You're not good at the solutions that follow. Dante stood up. Go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll start tracing Victor's supply chain through legitimate channels. But tonight, you're done. And what are you going to do? What needs to be done? Lila stood up too. If you're planning something illegal, I'm planning to protect my company and everyone who works for it. How I do that is my concern, not yours. It's my concern if I'm complicit. You're not complicit. You found a problem and reported it to me. That's where your involvement ends. Dante walked to the door and opened it. Unless you're planning to report me to the authorities, in which case, do it now and save us both time. Lila stared at him, at the man she'd worked beside for 2 months, who tested her and challenged her and never once let her see past the careful control he maintained over everything around him, who was now telling her, not asking, telling, to walk away from something that could destroy them both. I'm not reporting you, she said. Then go home. She went. But she didn't go home. She went to her apartment, changed into clothes that wouldn't stand out in the Port District, and drove to the first address on her phone. The building was exactly what she'd expected. 4 stories of brick and peeling paint, windows covered with security bars, a front entrance that looked like it had been kicked in and repaired more than once. She parked down the block and watched. Nothing happened for an hour. Then a van pulled up. 2 men got out, opened the back, and started unloading boxes. Not large boxes, medium-sized, the kind that could hold anything. They carried them into the building through a side entrance, moving quickly and efficiently like they'd done this before. Lila took photos with her phone, trying to get clear shots of faces and license plates. The van left after 20 minutes. The building went quiet again. Lila sat in her car, debating. She could leave now, take the photos to Dante in the morning, prove she'd found something useful, and hope he didn't fire her for disobeying a direct order. Or she could go inside and see what was actually in those boxes. The smart choice was obvious. Lila got out of her car and walked to the building. The side entrance was locked, but the front door opened when she pulled on it. The lobby was narrow and dark, with mailboxes that looked like they'd been pried open repeatedly. Stairs led up to the right. An elevator that probably hadn't worked in years stood open and empty to the left. She took the stairs. On the second floor, she could hear voices. Music playing somewhere. The normal sounds of people living their lives in a building that had seen better days. She kept climbing. Third floor. The hallway was empty and smelled like mold and old cooking grease. She moved quietly, trying to look like she belonged there. Apartment 3F had a new lock on the door. Shinier than the others. More secure. Lila pressed her ear to the door and listened. Silence. She tried the handle. Locked, obviously. She was turning to leave when the door opened. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that suggested he'd been in more fights than he'd lost. He looked at Lila like she was an unwelcome surprise. "Wrong apartment," Lila said quickly. "Who are you looking for?" "My friend Sarah. She said third floor, but I must have the wrong—" "No Sarah here." The man stepped into the hallway, and Lila's instinct to run finally kicked in. She turned toward the stairs. Another man was standing there. Younger, smaller, but holding a knife in a way that suggested he knew how to use it. "Lost?" the younger man asked. "Just leaving," Lila said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can't do that." The first man grabbed her arm, not gently. "Inside. Now." Lila tried to pull away. His grip tightened until her arm went numb. The younger man moved behind her, blocking the stairs, and she was being pushed through the door into apartment 3F before she could scream. The apartment was mostly empty. Bare walls, no furniture except for a table and some folding chairs. And boxes. Lots of boxes. The same medium-sized ones she'd seen being unloaded from the van. "Who sent you?" the first man asked. "Nobody. I told you I was looking for—" He hit her. Not hard enough to knock her out, but hard enough that she tasted blood and the room tilted sideways. Her phone fell from her pocket, clattering across the floor. The younger man picked it up. "She's got photos. The van. The building." "Who are you working for, Dick?" the first man asked again. Lila's mind was racing, trying to find an answer that wouldn't get her killed. If she said she was working alone, they wouldn't believe her. If she said she was police, they'd probably kill her immediately. If she said, "Dante Morelli," she said, because the truth was all she had left. Both men went very still. "Morelli sent you?" the first man asked. "I work for him. He knows I'm here." A lie, but one that might keep her alive. "If I don't report back in the next hour, he'll come looking." The first man looked at the younger one. Some silent communication passed between them. Then the first man pulled out his phone and made a call. "We have a problem," he said into the phone. "Someone from Morelli's office just showed up." "Yeah, taking photos?" "I don't know. She says he knows she's here." "All right." He hung up, looked at Lila. "You're going to wait here while we figure out what to do with you." "I can just leave." "You can sit down and shut up." He pushed her toward one of the folding chairs. "And hope your boss actually gives a damn about you." Lila sat. The younger man kept her phone. The first man stood by the door, arms crossed, watching her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. 20 minutes passed. Then the door opened and a man walked in who made the other two look like amateurs. He was older, 50s maybe, with silver hair and a face that suggested he smiled about as often as other people experienced miracles. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Lila made in a month. "Victor Raines," Lila said, because who else could it be? "Miss Bennett." Victor's voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like what she'd expected from someone running drugs or weapons through residential buildings. "You've caused me some inconvenience. I'll apologize if you let me leave." "I'm afraid it's not that simple." Victor pulled up a chair and sat across from her. You see, you've stumbled into something that Dante and I have been carefully not discussing. And now that you're here, I need to decide whether you're a problem or an opportunity. I'm just an assistant. You're Dante Morelli's assistant, which means you're considerably more than just anything. Dante doesn't hire people unless they're useful to him. So what are you useful for, Miss Bennett? Lila's mouth was dry. Analysis, financial patterns, data processing. And you found the payments to Apex Advisory. Yes? Which means Dante knows I've been using his infrastructure. Victor leaned back in his chair. Tell me, what did he say when you told him? He was angry. I'm sure he was. Dante's very particular about his reputation. Likes to pretend he's legitimate now, as if changing the business model changes what we built together. Victor smiled, and it was worse than his neutral expression. Did he tell you how we met? No. We were young, ambitious. His father had just died and left him an empire that was bleeding money and enemies. I helped him consolidate it, eliminate the competition, build something that actually worked, and in return he promised me a partnership. But you're not partners anymore. No, because Dante decided he wanted to go straight. Clean up the business, distance himself from anything that looked criminal, very noble. Also very stupid, because you can't build an empire like his without getting your hands dirty and pretending otherwise doesn't change history. Lila tried to keep her expression neutral. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand something. Dante Morelli is not the man he pretends to be. He's not some reformed criminal building a legitimate business. He's a hypocrite who made his fortune on violence and fear, and now he wants to act like that never happened. Like the bodies don't count anymore because he filed the right paperwork. You don't what? Believe me? Ask him about his brother sometime. Ask him how Marco Morelli really died. Ask him who gave the order. Victor stood up. But you won't get the chance because you're not leaving this building. Lila felt ice in her stomach. If you kill me, Dante will know it was you. Dante will suspect, he won't know. And by the time he pieces it together, I'll be done with what I need to do here. Victor walked to the door. Put her in the back room. Make sure she's comfortable. We'll decide what to do with her after the next shipment arrives. The first man grabbed Lila's arm again, pulling her up from the chair. She tried to resist, tried to think of something to say or do that would change this. But she was being dragged through a doorway into a smaller room that smelled like mildew and had nothing in it except a mattress on the floor and a bucket. The door closed. A lock clicked. Lila was alone in the dark. She sat down on the mattress because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore and tried to think. Her phone was gone. Nobody knew where she was. Dante thought she'd gone home, and Victor Raines was going to kill her as soon as he decided she wasn't useful as leverage. She should have stayed out of this, should have listened to Dante, should have trusted that he knew what he was doing and that her involvement would only make things worse. But she was here now, and wishing wouldn't change that. Lila stood up and felt her way around the room in the darkness, looking for anything she could use. The walls were solid. The door was metal and locked from the outside. The window, if there was one, was boarded up. She found the bucket, which was empty and not helpful, found the mattress again, and nothing else. She sat back down and forced herself to breathe slowly, to think instead of panic. Victor had said something about a shipment arriving, which meant people would be coming here, which meant the door would open, which meant she'd have maybe one chance to do something other than wait to die. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt broken in the dark. Then she heard voices outside, movement, the sound of boxes being moved. The lock on her door clicked. Light spilled in, blinding after so long in darkness. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. "Time to go," the first man said. Lila stood up, trying to see past him into the main room. There were more people now, 5, maybe 6. All men, all watching her like she was a problem they were about to solve permanently. "Where?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." The man almost smiled. "Docs. Victor wants this cleaned up properly." He grabbed her arm, his favorite move, apparently, and pulled her out of the small room into the main apartment. The boxes were gone. The table and chairs were gone. The space looked exactly like what it was, an empty apartment that had been used for something temporary and was now being erased. They walked her toward the door, down the stairs. into the cold night air that smelled like salt and garbage, and the river. A car was waiting. Black sedan, tinted windows. The back door opened and someone got out. Dante. He looked at Lila, then at the man holding her arm, then at Victor Raines, who was standing near the building entrance with an expression that might have been amusement. "Let her go," Dante said quietly. "I don't think so." Victor walked closer. "See? She's valuable now. Proof that you've been investigating me. Proof that you broke our agreement not to interfere with each other's operations. We don't have an agreement. We haven't for 3 years. We have an understanding. I don't touch your business. You don't touch mine." She violated that understanding when she walked into my distribution site. "She's not part of my business. She's your assistant, your employee, your responsibility." Victor's smile was sharp. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk away. Stop investigating Meridian. Stop looking into my operations. And maybe I'll let her live." Dante's expression didn't change, but something in his stance shifted. "If you hurt her, there's no place you'll be able to hide." Big talk from someone who's outnumbered 6-1. "You think I came alone?" Victor's smile faltered slightly. He looked past Dante at the sedan, at the dark street beyond, trying to see what Dante saw. And that was when everything went wrong. The first gunshot came from somewhere Lila couldn't see, and the man holding her arm jerked backward, his grip releasing as he crumpled to the ground. She didn't wait to understand what was happening. She ran toward Dante because he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned into chaos. He caught her, pushed her behind him in one movement, and pulled a gun from somewhere inside his jacket. Lila had never seen him hold a weapon before, had never imagined him as someone who would need to. The disconnect between the controlled, calculating man who reviewed expense reports and the person now standing between her and violence made her head spin. Victor's men scattered, some diving for cover behind cars, others pulling their own weapons. The street erupted into gunfire that was nothing like the movies, louder, more chaotic, punctuated by the sound of metal hitting metal and glass shattering. "Stay down," Dante said, his voice eerily calm over the noise. Lila dropped to a crouch behind the sedan, her hands over her ears, trying to make herself as small as possible. She could see figures moving in the darkness. Dante's people, she assumed, though she had no idea how many or who they were. Men emerged from doorways and parked cars, surrounding Victor's group with the kind of precision that suggested this wasn't their first ambush. Victor himself had disappeared behind one of the building's concrete pillars, shouting orders that were half drowned by gunfire. One of his men tried to run and was tackled by someone Lila didn't recognize. Another went down hard, clutching his leg. Dante fired twice, controlled shots, nothing wild, and someone screamed. Then everything stopped. The silence after gunfire was somehow worse than the noise. Lila's ears were ringing. She could smell gunpowder and something else, something metallic and wrong. She looked up from behind the sedan to see Dante still standing, his gun lowered but not put away, surveying the scene with the same expression he used when reviewing quarterly reports. 4 of Victor's men were on the ground. 2 weren't moving. The other 2 were injured, one holding his shoulder, the other his leg, both making sounds that suggested pain and shock in equal measure. The remaining 2 had their hands up, weapons on the ground, faces pale in the streetlight. Victor was still behind the pillar, but he'd stopped giving orders. "Come out," Dante called, "or I'll have my people drag you out, and I promise you won't like that option better." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Victor stepped into view, his hands raised slightly, his expression carefully neutral. "Quite the production, Dante. I didn't think you still had it in you." "You thought wrong." Dante walked forward, his gun still in his hand. "On your knees." "I don't think—" "On your knees, Victor, or I'll put you there myself." Victor's jaw tightened, but he lowered himself to the ground, his expensive suit pants hitting the dirty pavement. His expression was pure hatred now, all the smooth charm gone. Dante stopped a few feet away. "You made 3 mistakes tonight. First, you thought I wouldn't notice you using my infrastructure. Second, you thought I wouldn't care. And third, you thought you could threaten someone under my protection, and I'd let it slide. She walked into my operation because I sent her." A lie, delivered so smoothly that even Lila almost believed it. "To see what you were stupid enough to be running through my warehouses. to give me justification for what comes next. Victor's eyes narrowed. Which is what? That depends on you. Dante gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward with zip ties and secured Victor's wrists behind his back. You're going to tell me everything. Every location you're using, every shipment you've run, every person on your payroll, and then you're going to shut down this entire operation and leave this city. You're insane if you think... Dante crouched down, bringing himself to Victor's eye level. Do you remember Marco? Victor went very still. My brother, Dante continued, his voice soft and deadly. Dead for 5 years now. Car accident, the police said. Brake failure. Tragic. Except it wasn't an accident, was it, Victor? I don't know what you're... Don't. The word came out sharp enough to cut. I've spent 5 years proving what I already knew, that you had Marco killed because he found out what you were really doing with the money we were moving, that you couldn't risk him telling me, that you thought if you took him out, I'd be too grief-stricken to figure it out. Victor's face had gone pale. Dante, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. You killed my brother. You've been using my company to run your criminal operations. And tonight, you tried to kill someone I actually care about. Dante stood up. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to cooperate completely. You're going to give me everything I need to dismantle what you've built. And in exchange, I'll let you live long enough to run. And if I refuse? Dante pulled back the slide on his gun, chambering around. Then I'll save myself the trouble and end this now. Lila watched from behind the sedan, her heart still racing, trying to process what she was hearing. Marco, Dante's brother, dead because he discovered something Victor wanted hidden, and Dante had known, or suspected, for 5 years. Everything she'd thought she understood about Dante Morelli shifted slightly, like a picture coming into focus after being blurry for too long. Victor stared up at Dante for a long moment. Then something in him seemed to break. Fine. You want information? I'll give you information, but not here. You'll give it to me wherever I tell you to give it. Dante nodded to his men. Take him to the facility. Miss Bennett and I will follow. 2 men hauled Victor to his feet and walked him toward a van that had appeared from somewhere. The injured men from Victor's crew were being loaded into another vehicle. The 2 who'd surrendered were being searched and zip-tied. Dante turned to Lila. Are you hurt? She shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. Can you walk? Yes. Good. Get in the car. Lila climbed into the sedan on shaking legs. Dante got in beside her, and someone else, a man she didn't recognize, got into the driver's seat and pulled away from the building like they were leaving a business meeting, not a crime scene. The facility, Lila managed after a few blocks. What is that? Somewhere we can have a conversation without interruptions. You're going to interrogate him. Yes. Dante, if you hurt him, that's necessary. Dante looked at her, and his eyes were hard. Victor killed Marco. He's been stealing from me for months, and tonight he was planning to kill you. So yes, I'm going to hurt him. And you can either accept that or spend the rest of the drive trying to convince me there's a better option. Lila's throat was tight. There has to be another way. Police, FBI, someone who will investigate me as thoroughly as they investigate him. Someone who will find every connection between my current business and what it used to be. Someone who will use this as an excuse to tear apart everything I've built. Dante's voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it now. I told you before, Lila. The law doesn't protect people like me. It targets us. And Victor knows that, which is why he's been operating through my infrastructure. Because if he gets caught, I go down with him. But if you kill him, I didn't say I was going to kill him. I said I was going to hurt him. There's a difference. The distinction didn't make Lila feel better, but she stopped arguing because what was the point? She'd walked into this situation by choice. She'd ignored Dante's direct order to stay out of it, and now she was watching the consequences play out in real time. The facility turned out to be a warehouse in a part of the industrial district that looked like it hadn't seen legitimate business in decades. Inside, it was exactly what Lila expected. Concrete floors, metal shelving, a few folding tables and chairs, and lighting that cast harsh shadows across everything. Victor was already there, seated in a chair in the middle of the space, his hands still zip-tied. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without the smooth confidence he'd worn earlier. Dante walked in, took off his jacket, and rolled up his sleeves like he was preparing for manual labor. One of his men handed him a folder. "This," Dante said, opening the folder, "is everything I already know about your operation. 23 shipments through Meridian over 6 months. 3 distribution points in the Port District. Payments totaling just over $600,000, routed through fake companies. What I don't know is where the product originated, who your buyers are, and how deep this network goes." "And you think I'm just going to tell you?" Victor's voice was defiant, but Lila could hear the fear underneath it. "I think you're going to tell me because the alternative is worse." Dante pulled up a chair and sat down facing Victor. "Here's what I'm offering. Full cooperation in exchange for a 12-hour head start before I notify certain people that you've been operating in their territory without permission. You'll have time to run, to disappear, to start over somewhere far from here, but only if you give me everything I'm asking for. And if I don't, then I'll make sure every criminal organization in this city knows you've been skimming from their supply chains and using my company as cover. You'll be dead within 48 hours, and I'll be slightly inconvenienced by having to clean up the mess." Victor's face went through several expressions: anger, calculation, fear, resignation. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Dante leaned back in his chair. "You know me, Victor. You know I don't make threats I won't follow through on, so make your choice. Help me shut this down cleanly, or die knowing you accomplished nothing except making my life harder for a few months." The silence stretched. Lila stood near the entrance, watching, feeling like she'd stumbled into a world that operated by rules she didn't understand and wasn't sure she wanted to learn. Finally, Victor spoke. "The product came through Newark. Container ships flagged as textiles and machine parts. My contact there would redirect specific containers before customs inspection, and I'd have them transported to Meridian for processing." "Who was the contact?" Victor gave a name Lila didn't recognize. Dante wrote it down. "The buyers? Small-time distributors mostly, people looking to move product without the overhead of dealing with major suppliers. I kept the transactions small, frequent, and untraceable." "How many buyers?" 30, maybe 40. I never kept a full list. Too risky." Dante's expression didn't change. "You're lying. You're too organized to not keep records. Where are they?" Victor hesitated. "Digital. Encrypted. On a server I can access remotely." "Access it now." One of Dante's men brought over a laptop. Victor, with his hand still bound, awkwardly typed in a URL and a password. A file directory opened, full of folders with coded names. Dante studied the screen. "This is your entire operation?" "Everything that matters." "Good." Dante nodded to his man, who copied the files onto a drive. "What else?" "That's it. That's everything I've been running through your warehouses." "What about Marco?" Victor's face went pale again. "What about him?" "Who actually did it? Who tampered with his car?" "Dante, that was 5 years ago." "Answer the question." Victor closed his eyes. "A mechanic named Torres. He owed me money. I offered to clear his debt in exchange for one job. He didn't even know whose car it was, just followed instructions." "Where is he now?" "Dead. Overdosed 2 years ago. I had nothing to do with that." Dante was quiet for a long moment. "Did Marco suffer?" "What?" "When the brakes failed. When he realized he was going to crash. Did he suffer, or was it quick?" Victor's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know." Dante stood up, walked away from the chair, turned back, and punched Victor hard enough that the chair tipped backward, and Victor hit the concrete floor with a crack. Lila flinched. Dante stood over Victor, breathing hard, his hand probably broken from the force of the hit. "That's for Marco. For making me spend 5 years wondering if I could have prevented it. For taking away the one person in my family who wasn't trying to destroy me." Victor was bleeding from his mouth, his eyes unfocused. "I'm sorry," he slurred. "No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught." Dante straightened up, flexing his hand and wincing. "Get him out of here. Drive him to the state line and drop him off. If I ever see him in this city again, he's dead." 2 men hauled Victor up and dragged him toward a vehicle. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just let himself be moved like cargo. When they were gone, Dante sat down heavily in the chair Victor had vacated and put his head in his hands. Lila approached carefully. Is your hand broken? Probably. You should get it looked at. Later. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Actually, genuinely tired. You shouldn't have come to that building. I know. You could have been killed. I know. And yet you did it anyway. Why? Lila sat down in the chair across from him. Because you were planning to handle this alone, and I thought, I don't know what I thought, that maybe you needed backup, that maybe I could help. You did help. You found the discrepancies, traced the payments, gave me enough evidence to confront Victor directly. But then you kept pushing, and you almost got yourself killed for it. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just... He stopped, seemed to recalibrate. Just don't do it again. I won't. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lila asked the question that had been building since the confrontation on the street. Your brother, Marco, what was he like? Dante's expression shifted into something that might have been grief if he'd allowed it to be. Smart. Too smart for the family business, but loyal enough to stay anyway. He kept trying to convince me to go legitimate, to use what our father built, and turn it into something that wouldn't get us all killed or arrested. I told him he was being naive. But you did it anyway. After he died. After Victor had him killed, yes. Because Marco was right. The empire our father built was destroying everyone who touched it. Enemies, partners, family. It was only a matter of time before it destroyed me, too. Dante stood up, cradling his injured hand. So I started transitioning, slowly, carefully. Getting out of the operations that were too dirty to defend, building legitimate businesses. It took 3 years to get clean enough that people stopped assuming every deal I made was criminal. And now Victor's tried to drag you back in. Victor never wanted me to get out. He liked the old way of doing business, the violence, the fear, the power. When I cut ties with him, he took it personally. Dante walked toward the exit. Come on, we need to get ahead of this before someone finds those distribution sites and starts asking questions. They drove back to the city in silence. Dawn was starting to break, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink that felt wrong given what had happened overnight. Lila's body ached from tension and adrenaline crash. Her mind kept replaying the gunfight, the interrogation, the look on Dante's face when he'd hit Victor. At the office, Dante went straight to his computer and started making calls. Lila sat at her desk and listened to him systematically dismantle Victor's operation, contacting the Port Authority about suspicious shipments, alerting building management about unauthorized use of the residential properties, coordinating with lawyers to ensure Morelli Enterprises was positioned as a victim of fraud rather than a participant. By noon, the story was set. Meridian's manager had been running an illegal operation without company knowledge. The perpetrators had been identified and dealt with internally before authorities became involved. Morelli Enterprises was cooperating fully with any investigations and had implemented new security measures to prevent future incidents. It was smooth, professional, and completely false. But it would hold up under scrutiny because Dante had spent 3 years building a reputation clean enough to be believed. You're good at this, Lila said when he finally hung up the phone. At what? Rewriting history, making it look like you were never involved. I wasn't involved. Victor used my company without my knowledge. That's not a lie. But you knew about it for 2 months. I suspected. I didn't have proof until you found it. Dante leaned back in his chair. That's the difference between being involved and being a victim. Victims get sympathy. Perpetrators get investigated. Is that what you are? A victim? Dante looked at her for a long moment. I'm someone trying to build something legitimate from pieces of something that wasn't. That requires being very careful about which truths get told and which ones get managed. You don't have to like it, but you do have to understand it if you're going to keep working here. And if I can't? Then you leave, and we both move on with our lives. Lila thought about that, about everything she'd seen in the past 12 hours. The violence, the manipulation, the calculated way Dante had orchestrated Victor's downfall while positioning himself as blameless. It should have horrified her, should have sent her running to the nearest FBI office with everything she knew. But it didn't, because underneath the violence and manipulation, she'd also seen something else. A man who'd avenged his brother's death, who'd risked exposure to protect his company and everyone who worked for it, who'd come for her when she'd been stupid enough to get herself captured, even though leaving her would have been safer. "I'm staying," she said. Dante nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Good, because we have a lot of work to do." Over the next 2 weeks, they systematically cleaned up the aftermath of Victor's operation. The distribution sites were cleared and returned to their landlords. The containers in Newark were intercepted and their contents documented for authorities. The buyers on Victor's list were quietly notified that their supply chain had been compromised and they should find new sources. Dante moved through it all with the same controlled precision he applied to everything else, delegating tasks, managing information, ensuring that every loose end was tied off neatly before it could become a problem. Leela watched him work and started to understand how he'd built an empire, not through fear alone, though that was part of it, but through ruthless efficiency, through understanding that every problem had a solution if you were willing to pay the right price, through knowing when to be brutal and when to be smart. She also started to understand herself better. The part of her that had reported fraud at Morrison and Hecht wasn't gone. It was just being applied differently now. Instead of exposing problems to external authorities, she was helping solve them internally. Instead of trusting the system to deliver justice, she was watching justice be delivered through channels the system would never acknowledge. It should have bothered her more than it did. One evening, 3 weeks after the confrontation with Victor, Dante called her into his office. It was late, past 9, and the building was mostly empty. He had a bottle of whiskey on his desk and 2 glasses. "Drink?" he offered. "I told you, I don't. Consider it a celebration. We're officially clear. The authorities have closed their investigation into Meridian. Victor hasn't been seen in the city since we released him. And our quarterly numbers are actually up because we're not bleeding money through fake consulting fees." Lila sat down and accepted the glass. "Where do you think he went?" "Victor? South America, probably. Somewhere with loose extradition laws and cheaper real estate. He'll rebuild eventually, but it won't be here. And if he comes back, he won't." Dante took a sip of his whiskey. "Because he knows if he does, I'll finish what I started, and this time there won't be any warnings." They drank in silence for a moment. Then Dante said something that surprised her. "Thank you." Lila looked up. "For what?" "For finding the discrepancies. For being stubborn enough to keep pushing even when I told you to stop. For—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "For not running when you saw what this world actually looks like." "I almost did run, several times. But you didn't. That counts for something." He refilled both glasses. "I meant what I said before. I don't hire people unless they're useful to me. But you've become more than useful, Miss Bennett. You've become necessary." Lila felt heat rise in her face and tried to ignore it. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that. You're helping me build something that might actually last. Something Marco would have been proud of." Dante's expression softened slightly. "He would have liked you. Would have appreciated the way you don't back down from difficult questions. I wish I could have met him." "So do I." Dante stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I spent 5 years being angry. At Victor, at myself, at the universe for taking Marco when he was the only decent person in our family. And that anger made me careful. Made me transition away from the business that got him killed. But it also made me cold. Made me push away anyone who got too close, because closeness meant vulnerability." He turned back to face her. "You've made that harder to maintain." Lila's heart was beating faster than it should. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between you breaking my vase and you nearly getting killed investigating my company, I started caring whether you lived or died. And that's complicated." "Complicated," Lila repeated. "I'm your employer. You work for me. There's a power dynamic that makes anything beyond that inappropriate at best and predatory at worst. And yet—" He stopped, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "And yet I find myself thinking about you more than I should. Wondering what you think about things that have nothing to do with work, wanting to know you in ways that have nothing to do with your ability to analyze spreadsheets." Lila set down her glass because her hands were shaking. "Dante, you don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just being honest. Because after everything we've been through, you deserve honesty." She stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped a few feet away from him, close enough to see the scar near his eyebrow in detail, close enough to smell the whiskey on his breath and the expensive cologne he always wore. "I've been thinking about you too," she said quietly, "in ways that definitely don't have anything to do with work. And it's terrifying because you're you, and I'm me, and this is probably the worst idea either of us has ever had." "Probably," Dante agreed, "but I don't want to stop thinking about it." "Neither do I." They stood there for a moment, the tension between them thick enough to cut. Then Dante reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and touched her face with his uninjured hand. His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle in a way that contradicted everything she knew about him. "Tell me to stop," he said. "No." He kissed her, carefully at first, like he was testing whether this was real or if she'd disappear if he pushed too hard. But when she kissed him back, something in him shifted, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. "I know. People will talk. They'll say you slept your way into this position, that I'm taking advantage of you." "Let them talk." "Oh, Lila, I don't care what people say." She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. "I care about this. About you. About whatever this is becoming. Everything else is just noise." Dante smiled, and it was real this time, reaching his eyes in a way she'd never seen before. "You're going to be the death of me." "Probably," she said, echoing his earlier response. "But at least it'll be interesting." They kept it quiet for 3 months, which in retrospect was impressive given how thoroughly the office seemed designed to expose secrets. Claire knew within 2 weeks. Lila could tell from the way the receptionist's expression shifted from professional indifference to something that might have been approval, though with Claire it was hard to say. The other employees took longer, but eventually the whispers started. The knowing looks when Dante called Lila into his office. The speculation about why her responsibilities kept expanding beyond what an administrative assistant normally handled. Lila tried not to care, but caring about things had never been her strong suit in the ignoring department. "They're saying I promoted you because we're sleeping together," Dante said one evening in his apartment, which had become their default meeting place since the office felt too exposed and Lila's studio felt too small. "Are they wrong?" Lila was curled up on his couch with a financial report she was reviewing, wearing one of his shirts because her work clothes were in a heap somewhere near the door. "Technically, no. Chronologically, yes. You earned the promotion before we started this." "This?" Lila repeated. "That's what we're calling it?" Dante looked up from his own work. "What would you prefer?" "I don't know. Something more definitive than this. Something that doesn't sound like we're still figuring out if it's real." He set down his laptop and moved to sit beside her. "It's real. I'm just not sure what to call it that doesn't sound either too casual or too presumptuous." "Relationship?" "That works." "Good." Lila went back to her report, but Dante took it from her hands and set it aside. "We should talk about something," he said. "That opening never leads anywhere good." "It's not bad. It's just complicated." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully, which meant whatever came next mattered. "There's still a piece of the Victor situation I haven't dealt with. A loose end that's going to come back eventually if I don't address it now." Lila felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What piece?" "The people he was supplying. The buyers on that list we copied from his server. Most of them were small operations, but a few were connected to larger organizations. Organizations that are going to want to know why their supply chain dried up. Can't you just, I don't know, tell them Victor's gone and they need to find new sources?" "I did tell them that 3 weeks ago. Most of them moved on, but there are 2 who've been asking questions, digging into why Victor disappeared so suddenly. And one of them has connections to people I used to do business with when my father was alive." Lila sat up straighter. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they know enough about my history to be suspicious. They know the kind of man I used to be, and they're wondering if I'm that man again." Dante stood up and walked to the window. "There's a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night. Neutral location. Just conversation, they say. But conversation in this world usually comes with expectations attached." "What kind of expectations?" "That I'll either replace Victor's supply chain or explain in very convincing terms why I won't." And if you don't convince them? Then they'll assume I was involved in shutting Victor down to take over his operation myself, which means they'll either try to partner with me or eliminate me as competition. Lila felt her chest tighten. You can't go alone. I won't. I'm bringing Marcus and Leo. He turned back to face her. But I'm telling you this because it might get complicated. And if it does, if something happens, you need to know what to do with the company. Nothing's going to happen. Probably not, but I've learned not to assume anything is safe. He came back to the couch and sat down beside her. The company is structured so that if something happens to me, control transfers to a board of directors I've appointed. You're on that board as of last week. Claire has the documentation. Dante, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being prepared. There's a difference. He took her hand. You've built this company as much as I have over the past few months. You deserve to have a voice in what happens to it if I'm not here to run it. You're going to be here. I plan to be. But plans don't always work out the way we want them to. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was being paranoid, but she'd seen enough of his world to know that paranoia was just realism with better risk assessment. Fine, she said. But when you come back tomorrow night, we're having a different conversation. One about something normal, like where we're going for dinner, or what color to paint your depressing gray walls. Dante almost smiled. Deal. The next night, Lila sat in Dante's apartment and tried to work, but couldn't focus. The meeting was supposed to start at 9. It was now 10:30, and her phone hadn't rung. She'd texted him twice. No response. At 11, she called Marcus, the head of Dante's security team. He's fine, Marcus said before she could ask. Meeting's running long. He'll call you when it's done. Define fine. Alive, uninjured, and currently negotiating terms that are taking longer than expected because the other party is being difficult. How difficult? The kind of difficult that requires patience, not intervention. Trust me, Miss Bennett, if there was a problem, you'd know. Lila hung up and tried to trust that Marcus knew what he was talking about. She lasted another 40 minutes before her phone finally rang. I'm on my way back, Dante said without preamble. Everything's handled. What does handled mean? It means I convinced them I'm not in the supply business and never will be. They were disappointed, but ultimately accepted it. That's it? They just accepted it? I may have offered them some compensation for the inconvenience of Victor's disappearance, and made it clear that continuing to ask questions would be bad for everyone's health. Jesus, Dante. It's done, Lila. That's what matters. She could hear car sounds in the background. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And then we're having that normal conversation you wanted. He arrived in 18 minutes, looking tired but intact. Lila met him at the door and hugged him harder than was probably necessary. I'm fine, he said into her hair. I know. Marcus told me. I still hated every second of waiting. Get used to it. This is what being with me looks like sometimes. Lila pulled back to look at him. Being with you? Is that what we're calling it now? Unless you have a better term. No, that one works. She kissed him, tasting whiskey and something else she couldn't identify. But I'm serious about the normal conversation. No more business talk tonight. No more discussions about people who might want to kill you. Just us, whatever that means. They ordered food that arrived cold because they forgot about it. They watched a movie neither of them paid attention to. They fell asleep on the couch, tangled together in a way that would definitely hurt in the morning, but felt right in the moment. And for one night, Dante Morelli wasn't a former crime lord trying to build something legitimate. He was just someone who laughed at the wrong parts of the movie and complained about Lila's cold feet and fell asleep holding her like she was something worth protecting. It was the most normal night Lila had experienced in months, and it gave her hope that maybe they could actually make this work. The real test came 6 weeks later when the FBI showed up at Morelli Enterprises asking questions about Meridian Holdings. Lila was at her desk when 2 agents in suits that screamed federal employment walked past Claire and headed straight for Dante's office. She stood up, intending to intercept them, but Dante's door was already opening. Gentlemen, Dante said, his voice carrying that particular tone of polite cooperation that meant he'd been expecting this. Come in. Miss Bennett, hold my calls. The door closed. Lila sat back down and tried to look busy while her heart raced. The story they'd constructed was solid. She knew it was solid because she'd helped build it, but having federal agents actually questioning it was different than theoretical risk assessment. 45 minutes later, the agents left. They didn't look happy, but they didn't look like they were about to make arrests either. Dante appeared in his doorway a moment after they'd gone. "My office," he said. Lila grabbed her tablet and followed him inside. He closed the door and sat down heavily in his chair. "They know about Victor," he said. "How much?" "That he was running an operation through Meridian, that he disappeared around the same time we filed reports about unauthorized use of company resources. They're trying to determine if I was involved in his disappearance or if I'm a victim of his fraud." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That my assistant discovered irregularities in the books. That we investigated internally and found Gerald Renton had been facilitating an illegal operation without company knowledge. That we terminated Renton and reported the findings. That Victor Rains was Gerald's outside contact and disappeared before we could question him further." "Did they believe you?" "They're suspicious. But suspicion isn't evidence, and they don't have evidence because we were careful." Dante looked at her. "They're going to want to talk to you, probably tomorrow. They'll ask about what you found and when you found it and whether I gave you any indication that I knew what was happening before you reported it." Lila's mouth was dry. "What do I tell them?" "The truth. That you found the discrepancies during a routine review. That you reported them to me immediately. That I ordered an investigation and terminated the people responsible. Don't embellish, don't speculate, and don't try to protect me by lying. Just tell them exactly what happened. Even the part where I went to that building against your orders? Especially that part. It establishes that you were acting independently, which means if they try to claim you were helping me cover something up, we have evidence that you were actually investigating without my knowledge." It made sense in the cold, calculated way. Everything about Dante's approach to problems made sense, but it still felt wrong to use her mistake as a shield. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked. "Then we'll deal with it." "But Lila..." He stood up and walked around the desk to stand in front of her. "If they offer you immunity in exchange for testimony against me, take it." "What? No, I'm not..." "Take it," Dante said firmly, "because that would mean they're building a case they think they can win, which means staying loyal to me would just destroy your life along with mine, and I won't let that happen. You don't get to make that decision for me. I do if the alternative is watching you go to prison for something I'm responsible for." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Lila said something she'd been thinking for weeks but hadn't had the courage to say out loud. "I love you." Dante's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "That's a terrible reason to commit perjury." "I'm not planning to commit perjury. I'm planning to tell the truth, but I need you to know that I love you, and that's not going to change regardless of what happens with the FBI or Victor or any of this." "Lila, you don't have to say it back. I know you're not good at this kind of thing. I just need you to know that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we handle it together." Dante pulled her into a kiss that tasted like desperation and relief in equal measure. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said quietly, "which is why I need you to promise me that if it comes down to choosing between loyalty to me and protecting yourself, you'll choose yourself. I promise to make whatever choice makes sense at the time. That's not what I asked for. It's what you're getting." He smiled despite himself. "You're impossible. You knew that when you hired me." The FBI interviewed Lila the next day in a conference room that felt deliberately designed to be intimidating. She told them everything exactly as it happened, finding the discrepancies, reporting them to Dante, the investigation that followed. She left out the parts about being kidnapped and the warehouse interrogation because those weren't things she could prove and would only make her sound either insane or complicit. The agents took notes, asked clarifying questions, and gave her no indication of whether they believed her or thought she was covering for Dante. "One last question," the older agent said. "Are you romantically involved with Mr. Morelli?" Lila's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Yes." "And that relationship started when?" 3 months ago, after the investigation into Meridian was complete. "But you were working closely with him during the investigation." "I was his assistant. Working closely with him was my job." "Did your relationship with Mr. Morelli influence your decision to report the irregularities to him rather than to outside authorities?" "No, I reported them to him because he's my employer and they involved his company. That's the appropriate chain of command for internal issues." The agent made a note. Thank you, Miss Bennett. We'll be in touch if we have additional questions. Lila left the conference room feeling like she'd just taken a test she might have failed, but wouldn't get the results for until it was too late to fix the mistakes. Dante was waiting in his office. How did it go? They asked about us, about whether our relationship influenced my reporting decisions. What did you tell them? The truth. That we weren't involved during the investigation, that I reported to you because you're my employer. She sat down. Do you think they believed me? I think they're looking for any angle they can use to build a case. Our relationship gives them motive to question whether you're being honest. Dante leaned back in his chair. But unless they can prove we were involved before you found the discrepancies, it's just speculation. And if they can prove it? They can't, because we weren't. 2 weeks later, the FBI closed their investigation with no charges filed. Dante received a letter thanking him for his cooperation and suggesting he implement stronger oversight protocols to prevent future incidents of unauthorized activity in his subsidiaries. It was over. Except it wasn't, because the damage was already done. 3 board members resigned, citing concerns about regulatory scrutiny. 2 major clients terminated their contracts, not wanting to be associated with a company under federal investigation. The stock price for their publicly traded subsidiaries dropped 12% in a week. We'll recover, Dante said, reviewing the damage reports with the same clinical detachment he applied to everything else. It'll take time, but we'll rebuild the trust we lost. How long? Lila asked. 6 months, maybe a year. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we work twice as hard to prove we're exactly what we claim to be. A legitimate business operating legally and transparently. Lila looked at the numbers on her screen. We should start a foundation. Dante glanced up. What? A foundation. Something philanthropic. Education, maybe, or small business development. Something that shows we're invested in the community beyond just making money. That's, Dante paused, actually not a bad idea. It would help rehabilitate our public image. It's not about image, Lila said, though she knew image was part of it. It's about doing something that matters, something Marco would have wanted. Dante was quiet for a moment. He would have wanted that. He always said the family should be building things instead of destroying them. Then let's build something. In his name. They spent the next 3 months developing the Marco Morelli Foundation, which focused on providing scholarships and mentorship to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in business or finance. It was exactly the kind of thing that would have made Marco proud, and exactly the kind of thing that slowly started changing how people viewed Dante and his company. The work was exhausting. Between running the foundation, managing the company's recovery, and dealing with the normal chaos of their relationship, Lila barely had time to sleep. But somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, something shifted. Dante started smiling more, started letting his guard down in small ways that suggested he was learning to trust that the world wouldn't collapse if he wasn't constantly controlling every variable. He took a weekend off. Actually off, no phone calls or emails, and they drove upstate to a cabin where they did nothing but exist together without the weight of the business hanging over them. I could get used to this, Dante said one morning, sitting on the porch with coffee and watching the sun come up over the lake. To what? Relaxation? I didn't think that was in your vocabulary. To not constantly waiting for the next disaster, to thinking maybe things could actually work out. Lila leaned against him. Things are working out. We're still standing. The company's recovering. The foundation is making a difference. We're good. We are, Dante agreed, which is unfamiliar but not unwelcome. 6 months after the FBI investigation closed, they held the first Marco Morelli Foundation scholarship ceremony. 20 students received full scholarships to business programs at universities across the country. Dante gave a speech about his brother that was probably the most honest thing he'd ever said in public, about how Marco had believed people deserved second chances and opportunities regardless of where they came from. Lila stood in the back of the room and watched him speak and felt something in her chest that might have been pride or love or just relief that they'd made it this far without everything falling apart. After the ceremony, one of the scholarship recipients approached Dante, a young woman who reminded Lila of herself at that age, all nervous energy and determination. Mr. Morelli, the girl said, I just wanted to thank you. This scholarship, it's going to change my life. You're going to change your own life, Dante said. The scholarship just makes it easier. Still, I won't forget this. Good. And when you're successful, help someone else the way we're helping you. That's how this works. The girl nodded and walked away, and Dante turned to Lila with an expression she'd never seen before, something almost peaceful. Marco would have loved this, he said. I know. They stood there for a moment, watching the students and their families celebrate, and Lila thought about how far they'd both come. From that first disastrous interview where she'd broken his vase to building something that actually mattered. From his cold calculation to something that looked almost like hope. It wasn't perfect. They still fought about work-life boundaries and his tendency to make decisions without consulting her, and her habit of throwing herself into dangerous situations without thinking through the consequences. They still had moments where the weight of his past threatened to crush whatever future they were trying to build. But they were trying, and that counted for something. A year later, Dante proposed in his office after a particularly brutal quarterly review meeting. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. No candles, no elaborate planning, just him looking up from a spreadsheet and saying, "We should get married." Lila had laughed. "That's your proposal? I've been thinking about it for months. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Seems like marriage is the logical next step." Logical. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. I'm serious, Lila. I want this. I want us. He seemed to struggle for words. I want to build something with you that isn't just business. Something that's ours. Lila set down her tablet and walked around the desk to sit in his lap, which made him smile because she knew he loved when she disrupted his carefully organized space. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Despite your terrible proposal skills and your inability to take a day off and your tendency to solve problems by throwing money at them. Those are all valid criticisms. I know, I'm marrying you anyway. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony that was about as far from traditional as possible. No church, no elaborate reception, just close friends and family in the Foundation's community center. Claire was there, looking almost approving. Marcus gave a speech about how Dante had changed over the years from someone who solved problems with violence to someone who occasionally tried talking first. Lila's parents flew in from Seattle and spent the entire weekend trying to understand how their daughter had ended up married to someone who'd once been on the FBI's watch list. It was imperfect and chaotic and exactly right. The years that followed weren't easy. Building a legitimate empire from the ruins of a criminal one took constant work. There were setbacks, clients who couldn't get past Dante's history, regulators who watched them more closely than other companies, competitors who tried to use his past against him. But there were victories too. The foundation grew, helping hundreds of students. The company expanded into new markets, building partnerships based on actual trust rather than fear. Dante slowly became known not as a former crime lord, but as a businessman who'd turned his life around and was using his second chance to help others do the same. Lila became COO after 2 years, which some people still attributed to her relationship with Dante, but most people recognized as earned through sheer competence. She transformed the company's operations, implementing systems that made them more efficient and transparent. She became the public face of the foundation, speaking at events and conferences about second chances and the power of education to break cycles of poverty and crime. They bought a house, a real house, not an apartment, with enough space that they could both have offices and not drive each other crazy working from home. They adopted a dog that Dante pretended to find annoying, but who slept in their bed every night. They fought and made up and learned how to be partners in every sense of the word. 5 years after that first disastrous interview, Lila stood in the Foundation's new headquarters, a building they'd renovated in a neighborhood that had needed investment, and looked at the photo wall they'd created. Pictures of scholarship recipients, stories of students who'd gone on to build their own businesses, or pursue advanced degrees, or come back to help the next generation. "We did this," Dante said, coming to stand beside her. "We did. It's not what I thought my life would look like. Better or worse? Better. Definitely better." He put his arm around her waist. "I spent so many years thinking redemption wasn't possible, that once you'd done certain things, there was no coming back from them. But you proved me wrong." "We proved you wrong," Lila corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. And you couldn't have done it without deciding you wanted something different. I wanted something different because of you, because you looked at me and saw someone worth believing in, even when I didn't believe in myself. Lila turned to face him. You know what the best part is? What? We're still figuring it out, still building, still making mistakes and learning from them. It's not perfect, but it's real. And I'll take real over perfect any day. Dante kissed her, soft and slow, in the middle of the Foundation headquarters, surrounded by evidence that people could change, that second chances could work, that love could exist even in the spaces where fear used to live. When they finally pulled apart, Lila noticed a young man standing near the entrance, looking nervous and out of place in a way that reminded her of herself years ago. "Excuse me," the young man said. "I'm here for the mentorship program interview?" Lila smiled. "You're in the right place. Come on in." She walked him toward the conference room where the interviews were being held, and Dante watched her go with an expression that suggested he was still sometimes amazed that this was his life now. Later that night, in their house with their annoying dog sleeping between them and the city lights visible through the window, Dante said something he'd never said before. "I'm happy." Lila looked at him in the darkness. "Yeah?" "Yeah. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm not waiting for something to go wrong. I'm just happy." "Good. You deserve to be." "So do you." "I am. Happy, I mean. Even when you leave your coffee cups everywhere and forget we have plans and work too late." "I'm working on that." "I know. And I'm working on not reorganizing your desk when you're not looking and stopping myself from investigating things that aren't my business." "How's that going?" "Terribly. I reorganized your desk yesterday." Dante laughed, and the sound filled the room with warmth. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in a bed that was theirs, in a house that was theirs, in a life they'd built from broken pieces and second chances. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no happily ever after promise that nothing would ever go wrong.